welcome to this session today, Voices of Ecosystems. And I'm really looking forward to have Nikolaus Sühr as a special guest today. And we here in the pre-discussion, we just thought about how long we know each other, and it's almost, I think, 7 or 8 years, maybe even more. But we haven't had contact for a long time, so I'm really happy to have you here, Nick. And maybe you also, as a kind of veteran of the insurance industry, knowing also both sides as I do, the corporate side and the startup side, which is now your current activity. Maybe you can just please introduce yourself in a couple of sentences, how you came to this industry and what you're currently doing, especially before we start a deep dive into the overall topic of this podcast.
Awesome, Julian. And I was positively not surprised, but it was nice receiving your message. I'm very happy to be here and for everyone listening. So my name is Nick. I'm 38, proud dad. And yeah, I don't even know whether it's still a startup, but at least it feels like that. Co-founder and CEO of KASKO, which is an insurtech, and I'll go into that in a little bit. How I ended up in insurance was through my family. My dad had a insurance agency for classic cars, and I always planned to take over the family business. Studied insurance, worked for a large commercial broker, and then felt ready after 4 years of university and 2 years of work experience to, go into the family business. It didn't end up that way. It has multiple reasons. I think 2 reasons for it were I do not have a passion for classic cars, and it was so. It would have been a waste, but also they didn't really need someone like me. I don't think they would have hired someone with a different surname for that role, and so for me that really wasn't there. Did some strategy consulting, and then started KASKO 8 years ago. And what we started as was, today you would call us, we wanted to build an embedded insurtech. So targeting non-insurance brands and integrate seamlessly, into their customer journeys, purchase journeys, onboarding journeys, similar to what you might know from buying travel insurance at a travel website. We, at the end, ended up finding an easier value proposition, easier access to value generation by helping insurers as a tech provider. And so we, after 2 years into that, we gravitated to our current model, which is insurtech as a service, and we help insurers or brokers, sometimes even big brands, to design and integrate insurance products into their various distribution and customer touch points. Embedded insurance, ecosystem-driven insurance is a large part of that because it requires different tools and more, customization. I would argue, but we also do bread and butter insurance on an agency portal, and actually finding how these things piece together quite nicely, and yeah, that's us.
You just mentioned, you are probably not a startup anymore. I understand that from the point of that you were founded now 8 years ago. But what is for you then here the crossing point from a startup to a, what is it now? Is it a grown up, or is it already an SME, or what? How would you describe that when you are not a startup anymore? Because you just mentioned that.
So the definition between an SME and a startup,
from
a kind of investor point of view, was a kind of scalable product that ultimately kind of detaches. It's a product. You need to be a product-led rather than a service-led organization, because services are not scalable. And then ideally, you kind of go, a startup is at that pre-seed or seed stage, and then once you've hit Series A, once you've raised your, I don't know, but for European standards, probably 5 to 10, 20 million, and your company is then valued accordingly, you are a scale-up. Now, I would argue we are a blend. We didn't take the venture backing route, not we did try. It's not. That was how we were socialized. 2015, 2016. And with the valuations as they were, and everyone thought that the sunshine would never end, that seemed like a very attractive proposition to get to where you wanted to go quickly. In hindsight, or with Captain Hindsight on my team, I'm quite glad that it didn't turn out like that, because times are getting tough, and the future is discounted more heavily. People look more towards the present. But I think that's a fair assessment of a startup, right? It's a product that can scale, and I think we are a blend of that. And I would say we are a startup or scale up, but we grow organically. So we look at convincing our customers to buy products and services from us, rather than convincing investors to fund future plans of how we're going to do that.
That's a good keyword, because maybe you can give us a couple of examples about the term embedded insurance. You mentioned that with travel, but maybe you can give some examples where you helped insurance companies or other parties with your services. Maybe some concrete examples which the listeners can imagine very easily.
So I think, first of all, in my little echo chamber, there's a huge debate and differentiation between embedded insurance and affinity or partnership. I am more relaxed about it, but the argument is traditional affinity or partnership insurance, similar to travel insurance. It's basically, I have a product and I sell it to someone. But ultimately, my travel proposition is pretty much the same across all airlines. Right, that's a travel proposition. That's a normal kind of affinity distribution, or like warranty insurance. Now, an embedded insurance would be to say, how do we designing a insurance product for Deliveroo, specifically so they can insure all of their micro deliveries, which otherwise couldn't be. So you look at the innate data streams, the innate customer touch points, and you design a product specifically for that. Now, ideally, you mass configure, and you don't have to tailor it every single time, but you are in the process of mass customization rather than standardization. For me, insurance is a very interesting point about ecosystems, because it almost comes on every part of the insurance value chain. Distribution, we've talked about it, right? You're embedding your product for someone else within usually their transaction. That's travel insurance. You could include some insurance benefits in a credit card or some other program, a loyalty-based program, so it's natively embedded, very low tech, but works really well. And doesn't actually need to be bad for the customer, because you can then buy insurance for a very low cost. Or it can be, Amazon protecting their customers by forcing all of their sellers to buy product liability insurance. So you have the transaction, you have the buyer, the seller, or some onboarding. So it's really, really interesting, especially in marketplaces. And insurance can provide a solution for all of these aspects, either to monetize or to add value. A lot of Airbnb or share economy startups needed embedded renters insurance for it to even make sense, because no one would rent out their apartment or their RV or camper if someone just trashed it and then you didn't have protection. But insurers also, and very traditionally so, have embedded other people's services and products in their core products. Think about a roadside assistance service in a car insurance. Or think about most travel insurance actually have lots of assistance. You find, where do you find a doctor? So insurers have traditionally embedded certain value-adding services in their products and then kind of sold them on. And then there's the third element, and that is doing the claims, the actual delivery. Everyone selling insurance is easy, but let's keep with the travel insurance. Who is then going to make sure that that some invoice from a hospital is actually checked, or that someone sends out the roadside assistance? So I think insurance is really interesting. And one example of that is we are currently working with one of our insurance partners for a travel proposition, which they can then integrate into their direct-to-consumer proposition on their website for their agents or some brokers or via API. But we're also integrating 2 other services outside of the insurance value stream, which is a parametric product, which means it pays out a certain thing if the sun doesn't shine. So it's like a weather guarantee, or it is a flight delay insurance. So if your flight gets delayed, you automatically get access to a certain lounge. And that's, to me, from both ends, kind of piecing these things together. And that is what I like being an enabler that helps really large parties to kind of connect and hopefully drive value.
And why do they need you and your technology? Why is it so difficult for the traditional companies to do that by their own?
So, first of all, a lot of big companies have built up similar stacks as well, and so have startups. So, let's say someone like AXA would have their own stack for their main business in each country, and then AXA partners would have their own stack, and they would develop certain things. But ultimately, it has to do with the flexibility of designing certain workflows and basic workflows that then look like an insurance product on newer systems that weren't built 20, 30 years ago.
The question is, when you are telling me that, and that is a question we already had also during my past insurance time with AXA, which role does artificial intelligence, and we see it now with the chances for open AI and ChatGPT and other things play today, or it could play in the future. Do you see that as a game changer, or is it would you follow your argumentation? Now in insurance everything is different. I'm exaggerating a little bit because we are used to particular buying patterns which might change, especially across generations. But how do you see that? So general question, AI and insurance, which role does it play for the business model and also for the seamless integration and for the offering itself in the future?
So I think that AI can play significant role. Whether, let's say, the end consumer interface, be that through voice or text activated, whether that is the primary use case, I don't know. I would just be slightly hesitant because of the frequency of interaction, just generally. And not because it couldn't. It's just I don't know whether the benefit is that wide, and what kind of questions or data it would have to get all of these customized products. But where I see it working really well is any form of customer service interface, etc. Any potentially even better FAQs. I think it could work, especially once the AI get not just from kind of merge with processes and they can do actions. We get the technology, we just don't find the use case for it, and the way to guide someone through this type of insurance flow where specific questions need to be set. I would probably invest more in data aggregation, proxy data on the background, rather than making that flow as open-ended questions with insurance, which will at the end have to be translated into legal print. And so I'm not so convinced on the consumer interface.
Okay, well, that's a clear statement, because the next question also goes a little bit in this direction when we look now in the future. The question is, in what extent does the insurance industry will be affected by ecosystem business model offerings driven by players outside the industry? When I remember Thomas Buberl, now CEO of AXA, when he was running the German operations, he was always telling through the management team, we don't have to look at Allianz and Generali so much. Of course, we have to, but the main competitors of the future or cooperation partners in the future are Google, Amazon, and others. Yeah, and the question is now, when I try to create a scenario of the future, please comment and challenge that. Won't be everything embedded one day, and we don't need insurance at all as a pure offering, because everything will be digitized and everything will be embedded into other offerings, whether that are particular products or even more integrated solutions, because that is what I see as a trend, that everything gets more bigger and integrated, and then insurance is just an embedded add-on offering to these integrated offerings for our life, which solve problems of our life. So this is a scenario. Do you see that as well, or when do you see it, if you see it, or how do you see that?
So I absolutely see, with the advent and consolidation of large distributors, or distributors and value-added ecosystems around health, wealth, travel, mobility, you name it, business, where there's lots and lots of data, that insurance is a natural play. And the more holistic and relevant that data is, the more holistic and relevant the insurance proposition around a customer can be structured. And so from an insurance point of view, you absolutely need to think whether that is a boat that you can survive to miss. Right? Because what it then means is all of a sudden you have very big, I don't think people if you don't like negotiating with your broker or your tied agents, I don't think you have one thing coming negotiating with Apple or Amazon. I mean, Apple just managed to create a $4 billion loss for Goldman Sachs on their fintech program, and I would argue that Goldman Sachs is pretty savvy at negotiating decent deals with them. But I think it's keeping that in mind to say because you stop being the dog and you're the tail, and I think that changes something fundamentally the way you serve. Having said that, I think there will be competitive GDPR, antitrust regulation, at least in Europe and probably in the United States, where we don't have this WeChat one app moment. I think there will be certain commercial and political implications to kind of break this apart. So there will be a room to maneuver. And it won't just be the one super app that knows everything about you. But what that then means is you will have, and you kind of already have it as well, you have fragmented insurance products. And so as a secondary move, once you moved it towards the point of sale, get the transaction, these transactions you're probably going to write at a loss because there's so much competition on it. Anyone being in, MediaMarkt is buying insurance way too cheap because someone else comes in and buys the premium at a loss because they want top line. So I think rather than just embedding the product, I think you need to then figure out how to manage the customer relationship, how to provide advice, which I think then insurers are really strong. Again, how to create certain advice because it can actually be convenient to make a quick choice that you can then alter again. That actually to me is also convenient because it will be for those instances where you then kind of go, but okay, how do I kind of aggregate these things together? And so insurers will, that is one thing. And the third thing that we're already seeing, it's very unlikely that one insurer can solve all of the needs of these parties. So they will try to have partnerships. And want to be the kind of enabling interface, which insurers have been traditionally quite good at because they work with so many industries and so many services. So I think that in a couple of years' time, embedded insurance or affinity insurance will be one of the top and fastest growing distribution channels with everything that then flows and create their own kind of kind of teams and capabilities around that, even more so than is currently the case.
Yeah, we are almost at the end, and you almost answered my pre-ultimate question, what will have changed in 3 years from now when we had this interview once again. Is there anything else you can add as a big trend in 3 years? What, of course, your company will become much bigger. No, just kidding. But honestly speaking, so what is for you the main game changer in the next 3 years?
Maybe just to that point, I don't think the company needs to get bigger. I mean, if we, as a means to itself, I think we want to continue to do cool shit with clients. We want to create value and get paid fairly forward and create a work environment, where you have blend meaningful work, meaningful relationships, and fair compensation. But whether that is a 25 or 255 or 2005, that doesn't. And we obviously want to provide, liquidity events to the investors who've trusted us, etc. But it's not like I need to grow, and that's I just wanted to. I don't know. I think that's a little bit. I think we're getting into a different era, and I think that. My 3-year-old daughter, Daddy, what have you done? It's like, I tried to build a big company. I don't know whether that's going to fly when she's 14. I think I'm going to have to tell her something different. And so within 3 years' time, I think what's going to be really interesting, and I'm going to leave some of the tech angles, AI, etc., out there. But I think what's going to be really interesting is if insurers marshal the plan of considering their insured assets as scope 3. And all of a sudden, what if I'm a car insurer and I have 4 million cars insured, and that's scope 3 in my ESG and net zero commitments? What I can and should do then, I think that is really interesting, whether it's in 3 years, but I don't know. I think this topic will be revisited. Equally on the asset management side, I think insurers, have a tremendous power and lever to how they deploy their assets, especially on the kind of long-term the long-term liabilities and life insurance, etc., which they can invest really long-term. And other than that, I think in 3 years' time, it's already started, to be honest. I think this whole concept of competition and collaboration is going to blend much more into co-opetition, which a lot of tech companies have kind of ingrained, and they don't have it ingrained because they're altruistic and Silicon Valley. I think with an increased productization of your offerings, you just kind of go, of course I'd love all the customers to me, but if someone else has these customers and I can productize the offering, I'll just let them sell it because, I'm just playing multiple fields. So I think that will also be something that will come away from the fringes and, let's say, the management offsites towards day-to-day decision-making on where to allocate resources.
Cool outlook, or interesting outlook. So, ultimate question is the question I ask everybody in this blogcast. Where do you personally integrate or act with an ecosystem mindset in your private life? Is there anything you can remember where you, by yourself, are kind of ecosystem driven?
I don't know whether I would use that word. To me, it's
of course not, but you can give an example.
But maybe so when I hear ecosystem in my personal life, I think a few things come to mind. One, I think it kind of comes back to our generation's responsibility to don't fuck up the ecosystem that we're working in. And by that, I mean start putting I rather than we or them in what needs to be fixed. It's everyone will play a part, and if that part is different, but that's what I'm thinking. Am I contributing towards a sustainable ecosystem? And then I think the other part is more on a more individual level when I'm kind of thinking ecosystem, I'm thinking groups, I'm thinking how to get things done, how to be helpful, how to be happy. That's actually how I went. And then it's just, be a giver. I'm not a, it's a path for me. I'm more of a quid pro quo. I hope I'm not a taker, but I'm more kind of like a quid pro quo, but be a giver in an ecosystem, because it's probably going to come back one way or another, and you cannot kind of control these things. But that were the two nuances that kind of went through my mind when you posed that question.
Cool. So thank you so much for answering this tricky question, and also for all the other comments and insights you did. I think me personally, I still learned a lot about my former industry, but also I think for all the listeners, you gave some insights and examples which can help also to abstract that to their environment. So thank you once again for this really, really interesting conversation.
Julian, thank you very much.